It didn't come from a slip of the tongue or an awkward joke. It came like a carefully timed strike, her voice carrying just enough for the room to hear. We were halfway through a toast at my best friend's rehearsal dinner when she leaned back, smiled at the table, and said, "Well, he's not exactly cut out for leadership." There was a pause, just long enough for the forks to hover over plates, before she laughed, light and theatrical, as if she delivered a clever punchline. A few people chuckled because they didn't know where to look. I didn't join them. Beneath the table, my thumb rolled over the ridges of a brass compass keychain resting in my palm. The thing had been a gift from her years ago, a half-joking token for a man who always needed direction. I'd carried it since. Tonight, it felt heavier than the whole room. She glanced around for the validation she'd aimed for, eyes scanning for allies. I caught the quick flare in her nostrils, the little spark in her gaze when she realized I wasn't giving her the scene she wanted. No flustered defense, no fake chuckle to smooth it over. Instead, I gave her a slow nod, the kind you offer when you've already decided something. A private signal she didn't recognize, or maybe didn't care to. The rest of the table filled the gap with safe chatter. I kept my hand on the compass, feeling its cool metal against my skin, and let her believe the moment had passed. It hadn't. Not even close. 2 days after that dinner, I was catching up on invoices when a flagged transaction appeared on our shared business card, $317 to a specialty daycare boutique across town. The name rang no bells. We didn't have any events, no client gift runs scheduled. I asked her about it that evening. She was in the kitchen, elbows resting on the counter, scrolling on her phone. Without looking up, she said it was for a client gift she wanted to surprise me with. Her voice was even, but she angled the screen away when a notification lit it up, too fast to be casual. The brass compass keychain was sitting on the counter next to her coffee mug. Afternoon light hit its surface just right, sending a thin beam across the marble. My eyes lingered on it for a second too long, because when I looked back at her, she was watching me, expression unreadable. Something about that purchase gnawed at me. Not the money, though that was steep for a gift, but the lack of mention beforehand. We'd always shared ideas for client appreciation gestures, debated them even. Now, this one had bypassed the usual conversation entirely. That night, I opened our business account dashboard. Password still worked, but the security log told its own story, multiple logins from devices I didn't recognize. The timestamps were late at night, hours I was asleep, and her laptop was the only one online in the house. The compass came out of my pocket as I stared at the screen. I rolled it between my fingers, its weight centering me while my mind pulled at the threads she might be hoping I wouldn't notice. I didn't change the password yet, not until I knew what I was locking her out of. The first breadcrumb didn't arrive with fireworks. It appeared in a corner of the screen I almost ignored. I was sorting receipts, pairing each line item with a PDF, when the Cloud app surfaced a For You tray, thumbnails I never curated, a shuffle of auto-synced moments I didn't ask to see. Her name sat at the top of the folder, not the shared one we used for invoices. The personal stream that mirrors from her phone whenever it grabs our Wi-Fi. Habit made me hover, nothing more. Then a frame froze me. It was the downtown lounge I recognized by the teal glass barback and the brushed brass rails. In the foreground, a crooked selfie taken at arm's length. Her smile wasn't posed. It was loose, eyes half-lidded in the way they get after a long laugh. The man beside her wasn't anyone I knew. Close-cropped hair, linen shirt. He wasn't leaning on her so much as toward her, the way people do when they're already deep in private conversation. On the table below, a small black box sat half in shadow. Jewelry, a party trinket. There was an explanation for everything if I wanted one. Angle, timing, a friendly coworker, a joke about the box. I let myself rehearse the innocent versions the way you rehearse exit routes you hope you won't need. The brass compass sat in my pocket, round and cold, as if it had eavesdropped on the thought and didn't approve. I clicked once to enlarge, then again to pull the metadata. Nighttime. 2 nights after the rehearsal dinner. Auto-uploaded at 12:41 a.m., which meant the image had made its way to the cloud while I was asleep in our bed and the house was quiet enough for the router to breathe. I told myself that timestamps aren't character witnesses. They're just clocks. Still, I saved a copy. Not to a folder with a loud name, just an archive tagged with numbers. The habit felt professional: document, don't dramatize. Yet my jaw tightened on the word archive, as if I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Her footsteps came down the hall right then. Bare, unhurried. A glass set on the counter. The tap hissed. I closed the window and returned to spreadsheets, eyes scanning columns while my mind replayed the angle of that stranger's shoulder. When she leaned into the doorway, phone in hand, she asked if I wanted tea in the same tone she used for calendar reminders. I said no and kept typing like a man happily married to his workload. Long day, she asked, thumb hovering just above her screen as a banner pulsed and faded. Numbers day, I said, not looking up. They multiply when you stare. She didn't laugh. She set the mug in front of me anyway and said we should plan something light for the weekend. Maybe that lounge with the teal paneling, because the music helps the ideas keep moving. I couldn't tell if she was testing or improvising, so I gave her the smallest nod I could manage and let silence do its slow work. When she left the room, I opened the cloud again, but not to the photo. I scrolled the thumbnails on either side of it, the context we pretend we don't need. A short video of a round of drinks arriving, the kind of shaky clip you take to capture glass catching light. A still of the ceiling fixtures. Then a shot of that ring box, closer this time, as if someone had dragged it into the center for effect. The lid was shut. No inscription. No caption beyond a single star emoji. Harmless on paper. Surgical, intentional in its neatness. I reminded myself that implication isn't proof. That public became distant does not equal private intention. The thought steadied me. Then I noticed the sharing icon in the corner, sent to 2 contacts. The names were familiar, her inner circle, the ones who narrate life with slogans and live for the almost innocent sting of a joke. The message field was blank. Sometimes blank says more than a paragraph. I put the compass on the desk and spun it with a fingertip. It juddered, then pointed wherever it wanted. I watched it settle on nothing while the upload spinner in the photo app traced a patient loop. I should have closed the laptop and gone to bed. Instead, I did the one thing that would keep me honest. I wrote myself a note. Date, time, file name, no adjectives. I didn't add how my chest tightened or how the room felt 1 degree colder. I didn't write that the ring box had been the loudest object in the frame. I wrote small square black left of napkins. Facts are simple. The body is. She returned to the doorway, a new outfit laid over one arm, pretending to remember a question she never asked. Did we RSVP for Friday? We did, I said. We hadn't. I waited for her to correct me and she didn't. Her eyes tracked the compass on the desk, then lifted to me. You still keep that thing? She asked, half smile, half dare. Helps me not get lost, I said, and I meant it differently than I used to. When she left again, I reopened the image for the last time and zoomed to the edge where her shoulder met his. There is a gap in every picture you can drive a story through. The trick is refusing to take the wheel. I closed the app, tucked the compass back into my pocket, and decided to sleep beside a person I was choosing, still to believe. Belief, I've learned, is not a verdict. It's a temporary shelter you stand under while you watch the weather. The second crack in the frame didn't come from a picture. It came from words, casual, half-coded, tucked away in a place she assumed I'd never look. I'd been mapping our shared files when I saw the chat backup icon in the corner of her synced drive. We'd only linked messaging archives once years ago during a move when she'd needed to retrieve a lost contact. She'd never unlinked it. Most people forget about the silent systems running in the background. The archive opened like a book I hadn't meant to read. Names I recognized from her social circles, coworkers, friends of friends, the self-appointed experts on other people's relationships. At first, the exchanges were noise, logistics, inside jokes about nothing. Then a thread from 2 weeks ago stopped me. A contact I knew only from holiday parties had written, "Is your guy from the lounge coming Friday?" She replied with a winking emoji, and if he can get away without the captain noticing. The conversation tilted after that. Half jokes about me always being in the dark, references to how I never checked the right places. No mention of names, no direct confession, just enough to let everyone in the thread know they were in on something. I read them twice, slower the second time, watching for the kind of slip that turned suggestion into fact. There wasn't one. Whoever this man was, they were careful, Or maybe she was the one being careful, shielding details from her own audience. The brass compass sat on my desk beside the keyboard. I spun it once, the way you test a coin for fairness. It stopped at a crooked angle, pointing not at north but somewhere between east and nothing. I scrolled higher in the thread. More teasing. Mentions of the teal glass bar and her corner table. Someone asked if I'd be at the upcoming event. She replied, "No, I've got him buried in spreadsheets." That part was true. I closed the archive, leaned back, and let the chair creak under me. From the hallway, the faint sound of her voice on a call, light, almost sing-song, the tone she uses when she wants to be remembered as agreeable. I couldn't make out the words, only the lift at the end of each sentence, a rhythm that didn't match the woman who asked me last night if we were out of dishwasher pods. The reality began to settle, not as a burst, but as a slow rearranging of the furniture in my head. This wasn't about a single lounge or a stranger in a linen shirt. This was a pattern of steps I hadn't noticed, the choreography of someone dancing just beyond my line of sight. When she hung up and walked past my office, she paused. "You're working late," she said. It was half statement, half test. "Numbers don't multiply without someone watching," I replied. My hand stayed still on the desk, away from the compass, away from anything that could give me away. She smiled faintly and kept walking, her footsteps measured on the hardwood. I turned back to the screen, the empty archive tab still open. Then I dragged the file to an encrypted folder, gave it a date-stamped name, and shut down the system. The compass went into the top drawer, not in my pocket this time. If I was going to start facing the truth, I didn't want to carry the weight of the reminder everywhere I went. Some things you set down when the road ahead stops pretending to be straight. The first phone call didn't sound like trouble. It sounded like courtesy, the tone clients use when they think they've missed an email. "Quick check," the ops manager said. "Is your partner sending a revised scope on the logistics project?" We got two versions, one from your address last month and one from her private inbox last night. I stared at the screen where our dashboard still showed unfamiliar midnight logins. "Send me both," I said. She forwarded the files while we stayed on the line. When they arrived, the difference wasn't scope, it was signature. Her version traded our company name for a cleaner personal brand and swapped the wire instructions for a new routing number I'd never seen. "Did you approve this?" the manager asked. "I didn't," I said. "Consider last month's the only valid doc. I'll send a note." I ended the call and only then noticed the faint oval my palm had pressed into the brass compass beside the keyboard. An hour later, a vendor pinged me about a bounced payment on an invoice template we'd used for years. "We thought you updated banking," he wrote. Attached sat a familiar PDF with one detail altered, the account number. Clean, quiet, designed to ride autopilot. None of it proved intent, not on paper. People mistype numbers. People experiment with branding. People make messy transitions when they chase independence. I told myself those truths while I exported audit logs from the platforms we shared. CRM, document storage, signature app. The timestamps lined up: 1:07 a.m., 1:11, 1:24, cuts across my sleeping hours like nicks in glass. Then the CRM notified me that 37 contacts had been exported to CSV at 2:03 a.m. from an IP a city away. A co-working space we'd toured once and never joined. I wrote the IP down, date stamped it, and emailed myself the note from a different account. Not drama. Chain of custody. By early afternoon, the competitor made his entrance by accident. A mutual contact forwarded me a deck for feedback, not realizing the file properties still bore my name in the template and her initials in the last save. The competitor's pitch lifted half a paragraph from a proposal I sent under NDA last quarter. I didn't feel outrage. I felt the geometry of the room change. I put the compass on the mousepad where I couldn't miss it and began to cut clean lines around the mess. Backups to 2 encrypted drives. Screenshots with redacted client names saved to an offline archive. A calendar pulled from the last 12 months that showed who, when, and how often meetings she marked as mentorship. When the two-factor prompts started pulsing on my phone at 9:12 p.m., 3 in a row from the signature app, I didn't approve them. Minutes later, a text arrived. "We need to streamline accesses. Too many roadblocks." That word roadblocks used to mean boundaries. Now it read as stage direction. I drafted a brief to myself, dates, IPs, file hashes. Paper remembers what people try to unsay. At dinner, she asked if I'd talked to the ops manager. Her tone was casual, eyes on the bowl she was salting too carefully. There was confusion, she added. I clarified. You sent a second scope, I said, folding my napkin. No accusation, just a sentence that sits upright in a chair and waits. She lifted a shoulder. We can't keep moving slow. I'm protecting the vision. She set the glass down so gently you could measure the distance between sound and performance. I'll send a note to the client, I said. We'll need one version moving forward. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, send yours. Back in my office, the compass caught a sliver of hallway light and threw it across the desk in a thin line like a seam I could stitch or sever. I chose neither. I documented. I opened a plain text file because simple tools leave the fewest fingerprints. I wrote what had happened and what hadn't. I had not confronted. I had not accused. I had not changed passwords. Near midnight, an email slid into my personal inbox from a client who never exaggerates. Off the record, he wrote. Your wife pitched us a loan last week. She said the partnership was evolving and we should expect new points of contact. Are you two still aligned? Aligned. The word sounds neutral until you picture a compass spinning and never settling. I replied with one line. All official business runs through me until further notice. Then, please forward any outreach from personal accounts. I opened the folder of old proposals and recognized how many weekends I had traded for bullet points that now lived in someone else's slide theme. The risk wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't about pride or perception. It was contracts, insurance, tax exposure, audit trails that could bend back toward me if I didn't act with care. I didn't feel panic. This was quiet, the kind of fear that makes you measure every step because any one of them could crack something load-bearing. I picked up the compass and weighed it in my palm until the metal matched my pulse. North didn't matter tonight. Only documentation did. Only proof. I backed up the backups. I printed the export log and slid it into a plain envelope. On the front, I wrote a date and nothing else. I placed it in the bottom drawer, under the legal pads beneath the spare charger, where things go when you're not ready to choose a direction, but you're done pretending you don't need one. 3 nights later, I was closing my laptop when my personal inbox lit up with a subject line that didn't belong. No greeting, no sender I recognized. Just a single word, insurance. The body of the email was short, but it read like someone had been waiting to press send. 2 screenshots, both of her email threads. One showed our quarterly financial summaries attached to a message with the competitor's domain in the address. The other was a draft of a formal complaint, half completed, suggesting I had shown careless oversight and was creating operational risk. The cursor in the screenshot blinked beside a sentence that hadn't yet been finished. Below, the anonymous sender had typed, "She's moving the pieces faster than you think." I read the lines twice. My first instinct was to look for the trick, metadata manipulation, a mock-up meant to turn me against her. But the details were too precise. File names we actually used, a meeting agenda I had sent only the day before, even the header colors from our shared templates. The compass was in my pocket. I rolled it between my fingers, the familiar edges grounding me as the air in the room thinned. She wasn't just drifting into her own orbit. She was setting things up in a way that would leave me carrying the full blame. And she had been deliberate, leaving just enough in the paper trail, phrasing things so they could be interpreted in her favor when the time came. From the hallway, her voice carried faintly. Not on a call this time, she was humming, moving through the bedroom in soft, unhurried steps. The sound of drawers opening, the hush of fabric. The soundtrack of someone who still thinks they own the whole board. I didn't interrupt. I didn't storm in to demand the truth. The truth was already here in my inbox, in the timestamps, in the language sharpened just enough to be credible. Instead, I traced the engraving on the back of the compass, our anniversary date, worn to a faint shadow, and thought about how long she must have been setting this up. There's a different kind of betrayal in realizing you weren't simply replaced. You were being edged out of your own story while still showing up for it every day. I forwarded the email to an address I'd set up for contingencies, then printed the attachments and slid them into the envelope from the week before. No labels, just another quiet entry in a record that would never forget. When I passed her in the hall later, she was on her phone, smiling faintly at whoever was on the other end. "I'll see what I can do," she said, her tone the same one she'd used on me when she wanted a decision to feel like my idea. Her eyes flicked to the compass in my hand as I walked by. She didn't ask about it. She didn't have to. By the time I closed my office door, I'd already decided how the next move would happen. Not in anger, not in noise, but in a way that would make her realize far too late that she was never the only one playing quietly. At 8:14 a.m., the courier knocked once and left a flat envelope on our mat, the kind with a metal clasp that makes paper feel heavier than it is. I didn't reopen it. I'd approved every page at dawn. Inside, revocation of her agency on client matters, a data preservation demand for our shared systems, and formal notice of a forensic audit covering 12 months. No drama. Dates, file paths, instructions. I set the envelope on the dining table beside the brass compass and a glass of water. The compass lay face up, arrow undecided. In my office, a scheduled batch went out, account freezes, permission rollbacks, and a memo to clients, subject line as neutral as air, transition of points of contact. Her door opened down the hall, 3 measured taps of heels, a pause, the refrigerator hiss. She leaned into my doorway, blazer sharp, eyes bright with rehearsal. "Do you need the car?" she asked. "I'm set," I said. "You'll want to check your email." "Later," she smiled, glancing at her phone. "Big day." As she passed the table, she twirled the compass on its ring and set it back like a drink she didn't order. The first alert hit before the elevator reached the lobby. Login attempt denied, signature service. 2 more followed, doc archive, CRM. At 9:03, counsel confirmed service by email with hard copies couriered to her co-working venue. At 9:11, the system's dashboard settled into green. Freeze executed, exports disabled, geofences set. I took a seat in a coffee shop across from her venue. Through the glass, I saw the projector glow and her silhouette pacing between slides, palms open. She's good in a room, that had always been the advantage. At 10:02, a staffer slipped in and handed her a white envelope. I watched the beat in her shoulders when she read the first page, the beat between calculation and story. A minute later, my phone buzzed. "We need to talk." Then, "This is extreme." I replied with one line, "Please direct all questions to counsel." The projector asked for credentials it no longer recognized, and the room deflated. No mutiny, just the dull collapse of momentum. She held the clicker still, and Ray threaded her smile, a mask pulled tight by habit. She spotted me and came across the street. Inside, she rested a hand on the chair opposite mine but didn't sit. "This isn't you," she said, voice steady. Her eyes cut to the compass on my keyring. "You could have just asked." "Clarified things with my clients without me," I said. "You exported contacts overnight. You changed routing details. Asking would have given you time to stage a softer story." She blinked once, the shudder of a thought. "You're making a scene out of paperwork. We needed agility. You were slowing everything down." She placed her clicker beside my cup like a prop she was tired of holding. "If your goal was to humiliate me." "My goal was preservation," I said, palms open. "Business continuity. Data integrity, personal accountability." A small practiced exhale. "You're overreacting and people are going to think." "Counsel will handle people," I said. "I'll handle systems." Silence opened. Outside, a bus sighed and moved on. "So what now?" she asked, the first unscripted line I'd heard in months. "Now there's an audit," I said. "You'll retain counsel. All client outreach from personal accounts stops. The archive is preserved as is. We separate the business cleanly." I let the words stack like labeled boxes. "And we stop pretending the map hasn't changed." Her jaw worked once. "You're cruel when you want to be." "I'm careful when I need to be." I stood, not abrupt, not theatrical, and left room for her to step back without feeling pushed. The keyring brushed the table, the compass spun and wobbled to a stop. I didn't check where it pointed. By noon, my memo had settled into inboxes. Auto replies came back with that neutral tone professionals use when they understand without saying so. The signature service logged attempted changes, blocked. The bank restored dual authorization and removed prior exceptions. A client replied with a sentence I read twice for its economy. "We appreciate the clarity." At home, the envelope waited on the table. I slid the letters into order: revocation, preservation, audit, and added one more: dissolution notices for every joint venture on paper, drafted and ready to file. I placed a pen on top: procedure, not bait. Her text arrived as I capped the pen: "You're going to regret this." The old reflex tugged, explain, soften, reassure. I filed the message with the others: documentation isn't a weapon, it's weatherproofing. I set the compass so its ring kissed the envelope's clasp, a small alignment only I would notice, and listened to the apartment take its quiet. When the door opened hours later, she stood at the threshold, eyes on the letters, on the pen, on the coin of brass catching the last light. She didn't ask what to sign first. She muted a buzzing phone without looking down. "Counsel," I said from the hall. "Tomorrow at 10. I nodded at the table. "Paper will be there whether we are or not." She placed her bag on the floor with careful hands. I walked past her, the keyring cool in my palm, the arrow finally still. I didn't need it to point anywhere. The move was already made. The first silence wasn't in the apartment. It was in the inbox. No more calendar invites with her name in the host line. No more quick clarifications from mutual contacts trying to keep things smooth. By the second week, the only mail with her signature was automated: subscription receipts, travel alerts, stale newsletters she never read. When the audit letters went out, the calls slowed. Clients who'd once tolerated her detours into charm now pivoted back to me without ceremony. Professional integrity was the phrase a few used when they declined her follow-ups. Some didn't bother to reply at all. The ones who did kept it short, safe, and final. I saw the shift on her face one evening when she came home later than usual. She walked past my office, paused at the door, then moved on. In the dining room, the light fell directly on the compass where I'd left it, still, unpolished, indifferent. She didn't touch it this time. The social accounts followed. First a gap in her posting, then a string of polite comments under old photos, then nothing. The groups she'd curated for years went quiet, her name sliding down membership lists until it disappeared. Someone else took over the event's calendar. She never mentioned it, but I saw the unread notifications stack up on her phone before she flipped it face down. By the end of the month, the co-working space had replaced her name on the door schedule. Reallocation of resources, the email read. No drama, just the administrative equivalent of closing a drawer. I didn't check in, didn't ask how she was filling her days. That wasn't my business anymore. My job was to keep the records clean: contracts in one folder, legal correspondence in another, the envelope from the dining table filed at the bottom of the cabinet with the rest. The compass stayed in the top drawer, not in reach, not on display. Occasionally, news of her reached me sideways. A vendor mentioning a project she'd decided not to pursue, a mutual contact noting she'd stepped back for personal reasons. The euphemisms were neat, almost kind. None of them resembled the reality in the archive. Once, in a grocery store aisle, I saw her at the far end. She looked down at her cart, turned into another row, and didn't glance back. I let her pass. It felt less like avoidance than like two people who had both agreed there was nothing left to salvage, not even recognition. On the day the last joint asset dissolved, my attorney forwarded the confirmation without comment. I read it twice, printed it for the file, and left it on the desk while I made coffee. The kitchen clock ticked without urgency. Later that evening, I unlocked the drawer, took out the compass, and set it in the center of the desk. Its arrow wavered, then stopped. Not at north, not at anything meaningful, just still. I closed the drawer again. Some tools aren't meant to guide you forever. They're meant to remind you how far you've moved without them. She wasn't gone, not in the absolute sense. She still existed in the world somewhere, but she no longer occupied any map I used. The difference was simple and complete. She was no longer relevant to the direction I faced. And relevance, I've learned, is the only currency that doesn't inflate.